Hi, everyone. My name is Tori Madison, and I have Scot Johnson here on the call with me. Welcome, Scot.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Scot is the founder and CEO of Digital Shovel. I'm very excited to be speaking with you this afternoon. So, can you just tell me what Digital Shovel is?
Digital Shovel is a company that provides infrastructure for Bitcoin miners, not the actual miners, but the house to put the miners in. We do the power distribution, the ventilation, the actual structure that goes around them, and everything in that context. And we do it all in-house here at our facility in Toronto.
So, you're based in Toronto. How long have you been in this industry?
I started mining 2015, 2016-ish, more seriously in 2016. 2017, started building stuff that wasn't just inside of my condo. And one thing grew to another going through 2017, and we started converting shipping containers. And people started asking me if we can do that process for them. One thing led to another. We started building we started converting shipping containers and selling them as data centers. That's when we founded Digital Shovel in 2018. And now it'll be 6 years as of January that we've been in
Mhm.
operation. And now we do everything in-house, literally from the raw sheet metal to the finished product out the door. We don't use shipping containers anymore. We make a completely modular solution. They're kind of like building blocks that can be expanded up and down depending on the size of your site. We do all the software in-house, the automation, the PCB assembly for our in-house PDUs, all here at our facility.
So, for someone who's not familiar with Bitcoin mining or Bitcoin at all, how in the world does one mine a Bitcoin? And it can
In
be
a
high
literal
level. I
sense,
mean, we don't have to get too much into the nitty-gritty details, but
I'll jump to assuming they know the premise of Bitcoin mining. I'll talk more about the infrastructure side of it. So let's say you know what Bitcoin mining is, more or less. You've got some money, you want to get started. You need three pieces to that puzzle. One is affordable power, which there's a variety of different markets that you can get that. You can either go and try to get it from a utility at a good rate, or you can go through, we have partner sites that we work with. So if somebody buys our product, we can help them find a place to put their pod and get power. You need the infrastructure to go around it, which is what we do. And then you need the miner. And all three of these things is a lot like buying Bitcoin in the sense that when you buy them is going to dictate how much money you're going to make. Because if you go to buy them, peak market, which hopefully we're going to be at a crazy new peak at the end of this year, or sorry, at the end of next year, rather, it's probably not going to be the time to go buy Bitcoin miners because the price of the mining equipment usually follows the price of the actual Bitcoin, which means it's going to be incredibly expensive to get into the space. But you really need to try to buy those three things as efficiently and cost effective as possible. And then lastly, you need a partner that can help you, or you can run it yourself, somebody to manage it, or you do the miner management yourself.
if someone's interested in mining Bitcoin, what would be some benefits of them working with you specifically in order to do that?
One of the advantages of our units is just that they're completely turnkey. I mean, they include everything you need in order to start mining in a very simple modular unit. The way we use smaller blocks and scale them up and down based on the size of your site allows you flexibility depending on the size of your deployment. Whereas there's other manufacturers where your minimum size is 1 or 2 megawatts, which can be a significant spend. You can be spending a couple $100,000 on your containers. Plus, depending on the price of miners, you can be spending anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million. So that makes the barriers of entry very, very difficult. Whereas we offer solutions that are as small as 15 miners, which you can buy one of our smaller nanopods, which actually don't even need a big site. You could put that in a backyard or an industrial unit and kind of get into the space for sub 50 grand, including your mining equipment, depending on what the price of mining equipment's at. So we really have flexibility there. The fact that we're made in North America versus some of the overseas solutions means a lot of the support and compatibility with electrical regulations is a lot better than some of the other items in the market. And our value proposition, our price point for comparable units, something that complies with the regulations in both Canadian and US markets. We're one of the lowest price points on a per kilowatt or per megawatt basis.
How does Digital Shovel approach innovation in its design and development of your products, such as the mini pods?
It's a combination of things. It's a combination of trying to be forward looking as possible to see where the mining equipment is going and the form factors, what's changing in terms of technology, what's changing in terms of the atmospheres and environments that our clients are going to be operating in. And I think the most important thing is getting feedback from our clients. I mean, being as large as we are, we've just shipped over 1,100 containers across North America. We have a lot of clients to get feedback from because nothing's ever perfect. There's always some
Right.
room for improvement.
Mhm.
And it's naive to think that like I'm just going to design a good product and sell it to people. You need to get the feedback from those people because they're going to come up with, just like with AI and self-driving cars, you need those edge cases and that feedback to get from the industry and see, okay, you know what, I never thought of that scenario. I didn't know how that scenario would play out. You get that feedback, you improve your design. So even though we've had call it four major revisions and product model changes. Within those four major revisions, we're constantly making tweaks, which is one of the advantages we have of building everything in-house rather than somebody who subs it out to other people. You can't go back and make those changes. You can't make prototypes quite as quickly. The cycle time to do that, instead of I can come up with an idea following this interview, we can be prototyping it in our metal shop by the end of this week. That could take months. In other instances where you've got external designers and external fabrication place where different parts are made in different places, having everything in-house and being as vertically integrated as we are allows us really to thrive in a constantly changing environment.
I took a few classes in product management in my past, and I was really fascinated by it, especially somebody that has an entrepreneurial mindset, such as yourself. Customer feedback is so important in understanding that true value proposition and the fact that you do everything in house. You don't have any red tape. You can then start on a new project tomorrow. So those are all really great things in order to keep your company moving forward, staying ahead of the trends rather than getting behind them. And it is funny when you're building something in your mind, you can be like, oh, this is the perfect solution. This works so well. And then you put it out to the world and people are like, this didn't work for me. So one of my questions was, how does customer feedback influence the evolution of your products and services? Do you have anything specific around that since we're on that topic?
So recently, one of the big changes we made to try and accommodate a lot of our clients in Texas, whereas traditionally you'll have filter set where it filters the air, catches the air as it comes into the data center, so you don't get a bunch of dust and dirt in there. The problem we were having there was huge dust storms would come through and just instantly clog the really dense filters we have. So what we developed in partnership with one of our big clients down there is a pre-filter system that basically it covers two aspects. One, it only catches really heavy dirt, but that's what you get during the big dust storms. You can clean it very quickly rather than having to throw that filter out. And you can change it from outside of the data center. So when you change a big dusty filter, it's like changing your condo filter. When you pull it out, dust flies everywhere. Well, if you're doing that and there's air flying through the data center, it's going to blow that dust out of the filter into your miners. Whereas with this setup, we've got a pre-filter now that we can pull out from outside of the container, dust it off or blast it off with water, put that back in, and alleviates the constant clogging of the filters, which can be quite expensive. If your usual cycle time is anywhere from 2 to 6 months for those filters. You get multiple dust storms in 1 month, the filters will be completely clogged, and most of those filters are not washable.
And it's important to control the climate temperature of the filters as well. That's great.
Yes.
Yeah. So I would ask you, how do you see the crypto mining industry evolving in the next 5 years?
I try not to look 5 years out just because it's you're shooting. um,
Because it's
Yeah,
crypto.
yeah, that's a long time. That's like asking
Right.
me where Nasdaq's going to be in 50 years. But relative to, like if you go out the next year or two, we're seeing a lot of consolidation, a lot of big players, and more. It's becoming easier and easier for really big players to get into the market. I think we're going to continue to see a price increase. I've been saying around 100K by the end of next year. Even with the halving coming through, we're seeing two things. One, traditionally we get a pre-rally going into it, with the exception of the last one, which COVID caused that as a bit of an anomaly. And then we're also seeing a dramatic increase in transaction fees. I mean, just in the last 2 months here, we were kind of floating around that 5 to 6% in relation to the amount that the block reward was at. And as of today, we're almost at 10%, which is almost a doubling of the transaction fees we're seeing on a per block level. Which, as if we continue on that track, just the transaction fees alone will offset the reduction in the block reward if we continue to increase by that amount. That's not even factoring in the price of Bitcoin continuing to increase pretty dramatically. With the ETF hopefully happening in the first quarter of next year, maybe the first month if all goes well, that's going to result in an undeniable rally. I don't think that is fully priced into the market. And that's going to result in even higher, bigger transaction fees because you're going to have these big blocks of ETFs that need to rebalance every single evening when the market closes. And they will not wait for those transactions. They will say, look, I want that transaction to post and close right away. So you're going to see some really big movement in the price of Bitcoin as a result of the demand from the ETF, both on a fee side and just the price as a whole. I talked more about Bitcoin price than I did on mining, but I mean, higher Bitcoin price means just better economics for miners as a whole.
Actually led me to my next question, which how does the market volatility in cryptocurrencies affect your business model and your strategies?
Um, the going back to our company name, Digital Shovel, we are selling shovels to the gold miners. And if you go back to the gold rush, that was the business to be in. I'm not saying mining is not the business to be in. There was a lot of people that made a lot of money mining gold back then. However, we don't feel quite as much of the up and down waves as rapidly. We certainly go through the cycles. This last down cycle was actually probably the worst. Previous ones, even when we dropped down to 2,900, we were still busy and doing orders constantly through that time. We still had somewhat of a backlog. Through the last summer, not as much. In fact, there was no backlog going through last summer. We actually had inventory for the first time in 5 years of being in business. But to answer your question, it is not proportional to the effects that somebody that's just strictly mining Bitcoin and their revenues tied directly to Bitcoin. We don't feel those waves on the downside. On the upside, we do. The only difference is when we see that upside swing, we're limited in terms of our capacity of production. So although, demand might go up 100x, I can only produce so much. We'll add and augment our production capacity, add shifts, stuff like that. But we can only do that so much. And we don't participate in some of the games that a lot of the mining equipment manufacturers, like the actual miners, Bitmain and What's Miner do, where they change their prices based on the price of Bitcoin. In fact, they change them daily sometimes, depending on where the market is moving. We try to be a long-term partner for our customers rather than just try to make a quick buck as the price goes up. Our price is relatively the same, whether the market's up really high or it's taken a dump. And when it does, we actually usually are giving discounts in those markets, but we don't turn around and dramatically increase our pricing when the market goes up.
Who would you say are the typical customers for crypto mining for your services, and how has that demographic changed over time?
It's a mix. I mean, historically, when we started, we were just selling the really larger solutions, like 2 megawatts and above. So just the barriers to entry meant you've got to be somebody with, $1 million to play with. Whereas
Right.
now we offer smaller solutions for customers that are the smallest 50 grand. Not that it's small money, but in this space it is. Even though we do provide the larger size offerings, our client span is a mix. We have some clients that'll do 100 megawatts plus, which is millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of miners and data centers, and then we get the others that are just doing smaller operations that are 50 to 100 grand, but they're still mining Bitcoin and supporting the network.
And then what about from a global perspective? So you have customers all around the world. What are some challenges or opportunities in international expansion?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked about that. We just started providing products internationally, and the reason for that is previously our stuff was too big to ship. You could ship it, but the shipping costs were preventative. Our units now can actually fit inside of a 40-foot shipping container, so they can go into remote markets. They can be taken apart in pieces and shipped flat pack, which means you can fit 11 of our medium-sized pods inside of a container. We recently shipped some to Africa for a company called Gridless, which is they're doing. I mean, they'll talk about their business better than I will, but more or less they work with these microgrids in Africa that
Hmm.
have this excess power, but they need a load there in order to stabilize the grid. And then when the demand goes up, they turn the Bitcoin mining down, and vice versa. Which is something that a lot of people overlook is the benefits that Bitcoin mining does to grids, whether it's a small grid like that or a big grid like you'll have in the US, where their ability to turn that load on and off based on demand, it actually helps to stabilize the grid and acts as a benefit. So much so that Texas provides they don't just not charge you for the electricity you're not using, but they actually pay you to turn off during certain times. So you're making money just for being off. And they're doing that because they realize this is a useful tool to help the electrical grid and prevent situations like we had during the ice storm in Texas and other markets where there's been blackout and brownouts.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, the huge ice storm that they had. And Texas operates a different system than the rest of the US in terms of energy, right?
Yeah, the ERCOT is
Yeah.
kind of unique um, way of dealing with things. I mean, it works from down there. It's a very complex system in terms of the regulatory framework. Very unique to any other state. I'm not a super expert on that. I know what our clients deal with, but we don't have any one-to-one relationships direct with ERCOT. But they have a very unique framework there, and it seems to be working for them, with the exception of the case I just mentioned a few minutes ago.
So, how is the industry addressing concerns about high energy consumption and crypto mining?
So again, it's a common misconception that crypto mining is that the high energy consumption is 100% a negative. The price of energy, if you look at a bell curve, the price of energy is made up from that top end peak. That's what you're actually paying for. The rest of the time, there's a whole bunch of idle capacity. So we have all this chunk of idle capacity here that's not used. And if it's nuclear or hydroelectric or really cheap natural gas, that idle capacity is not billed at. Now, if I could take and use all my idle capacity and not have it affect my top half, I could actually bring down, or not my top half, but that top portion, I could actually bring down the cost for everybody, because now I'm charging for all this time that was idle, and I bring down my overall average cost of electricity for the whole group. Bitcoin mining is one of the only loads of its size that can be turned off that rapidly. You can't go and turn off an aluminum smelting plant or a hydrogen generation plant or ammonia plant or something like that. Plants that consume extreme amounts of energy, those things take time to turn off. Bitcoin mining, you can signal and shut down, 95% of the data center minus emergency services and ventilation. And you can do that in a matter of seconds. And then you can ramp it back up in the same amount of time. That is something that is unheard of for electrical grids, and they're starting to realize the benefit. And they're saying, okay, all of this wasted capacity I have, I can now charge for it. I can make money 100% of the time instead of just 20% of the time. I'm being
Mhm.
extreme with those numbers, but if you can take and use it, even if it's at a discount, now you can bring down the cost for the consumer. It's like creating, a reverse peak power plant. So, and what I mean by that is you're using up the capacity and it's sitting there idle but being charged for, but the second you need it, you can just turn off this customer and use the power somewhere else, instead of having that customer always on, and now when you need it, you can't turn them off. You need to have another power plant that could turn on rapidly to deal with that extra demand. We're kind of creating what I like to call a reverse peak power plant.
Other than energy consumption, what are some of the major regulatory challenges that you're facing within the industry, and how does your company navigate them?
uh Ignorance. I don't know if that's a regulatory one, but our friends at the Satoshi Action Fund and a couple other groups and lobby groups have been working really tirelessly on this. And it's, the punitive actions that a lot of regulatory bodies are taking towards Bitcoin miners, which are completely unbalanced and unfair. I'll use sound as an example. In a lot of states, you might have a data center or a high process AI data center for an HPC. They will have a set amount of sound that they're permitted to emit.
Sound,
Bitcoin,
like
Yeah, sound like from their dry coolers and the devices that sit on top, because Bitcoin mining can generate a fair bit of sound, as can other cooling devices and industrial applications.
Hmm.
You can go in the same state and have a Bitcoin miner, and they're only allowed to permit or emit half as much sound, which it doesn't seem like a big deal, but like the work and the cost that goes into trying to mitigate that sound when you're both just doing computing, you're both computing and processing something. Just there's this negative cloud over top of Bitcoin that's making it a lot harder for certain producers to go into those states. We see it often on a regulatory side, both from the electrical inspection side. Now, some of that is just, and the reason I say that is there's a lot of cowboys and that think, hey, I can just cut apart a shipping container, throw some pods, an electrical panel I bought, and MacGyver it together, and they end up having fires. So unfortunately, there have been a lot of instances of guys doing that, or some overseas producers shipping units here that are really unsafe, and people have been injured, unfortunately. So the electrical regulation or regulatory authorities in various states have come back and said, hey, you know what? We're going to be way more stringent on these units, and they're more stringent than they are on equipment in other industries. Some of it I applaud if it means that they're going to be just inspecting things with a little more diligence. However, there's others where they've just said, no, we're not allowing this type of equipment in our state. That obviously we challenge, and we pride ourselves on being compliant with both the US code and Canadian code, and making one of the safer products on the market. So for them to come and say, okay, you know what, just because you're mining Bitcoin, we're not letting your stuff into our state. That's definitely been a challenge for us in some states. It hasn't
Hmm.
been as much, but we still see pockets of that occurring, and that happens whether it's my equipment or any other manufacturer for that matter.
I want to ask you about security. So, how does the industry tackle security concerns in relation to mining farms and data protection?
On a physical sense, or in terms of like people stealing their crypto?
I'm interested in both.
On a physical sense, I mean, it varies based on the site. It really depends on where the client is located. And we do leave that up to our client. I mean, our pods can come with a full security kit, cameras, remote monitoring, key fob doors, all those things. And then different sites will, some of them, they'll just be a container sitting out in the field and it's rural enough and they're happy with that. Other ones will have, full fence, barbed wire, 24-hour security. It really depends on the client and the risk assessment they do for their physical area and what their insurance requires at the end of the day. If it's something really, really remote, like some of our oil field projects where they're using flare gas, you can have all the alarms in the world. Somebody's going to break in and take the stuff. It's important to have proper insurance and make sure you're covered in that sense. In terms of the custody side of stuff with your Bitcoin, I mean, that's one of the things that we've really seen evolve the most since the last couple bull runs
Okay.
is custody solutions now have become mainstream. Before, there was always this issue of, yeah, I want to get into Bitcoin mining, whether it be investing or just actually doing the mining. You still needed somewhere to hold your coins. And for a lot of people, setting up their own node, having their own, cold storage and everything that went along with that, was either quite cumbersome or something they didn't want the liability of doing. There's now, very reliable, safe custody solutions that you can use to store your Bitcoin without having to worry about the counterparty risk of, especially if you're a large Bitcoin miner, some of the custody solutions out there, you were going to store more Bitcoin than they had on their balance sheet, period. Which obviously was, a big challenge and obstacle for a lot of people that wanted to get into the space.
Hmm. Interesting. So, let's review 2023 for Digital Shovel, and then we'll talk about looking ahead into the next year. Can you share any milestones and achievements that Digital Shovel accomplished within the last year?
Internally, we introduced a variety of new machinery and equipment that we got fully operational. So we installed our entire PCB assembly line, so we can do our own circuit board assembly, both for our current PDU that we're building, as well as several other components that we make that we used to sub out. Again, lets us speed our production, speed our ability to change design and innovate a lot quicker. Installed an automated powder coating line, which moving from liquid paint to powder makes just a more durable, more robust product. We just created that modular bolt together unit I talked about, where you could take our pod and actually can come apart like an IKEA, cabinet set. A little more complicated than that, but same premise where you could basically put it together with several friends and bolt it together in the field. And that's a first for stuff in this industry.
Congratulations.
And then I
Um,
guess shipping our first set of units abroad, both to Africa and then several units to Australia as well, shipping overseas. We shipped throughout North and South America in the past, but those were our first units that we've shipped overseas.
Congratulations. How would you say Digital Shovel has influenced the broader mining industry?
I think of individual things that people have copied, because we constantly we constantly have IP that we're filing and patents, and usually a year or two after somebody's copying them, which I mean, what do they say? Copying is the best.
Oh, form of flattery.
Yes, I'm trying to think of stuff that people have copied recently. Yeah, we're seeing more and more people move over to our modular style setup where you can actually take units and assemble them together in a string in order to scale up and down in size rather than using fixed units. Some of the form factors of our PDUs have inspired other people to do comparable units. Um, and then on our customer side, our clients are really starting to understand the modular nature of our pods and the way that you can take units, expand your site, reduce your site size, take a part of the data center and go put it somewhere else rather than having to rip the entire thing down or having wasted inventory. That's really allowed a lot of our clients to change their business model, especially oil and natural gas guys, which I don't think I touched on too much, and the positive influence that Bitcoin mining is having on the gas side, where I'm sure you've seen them across the U.S. where you've got those oil wells and there's a big pipe coming up shooting flames into the air, and it's basically just burning off excess natural gas. And when it does that, it's a very, very dirty burn. It creates a lot of emissions into
Mm.
the ozone. Um, and Bitcoin mining provides a means for you to go put a generator on there, capture that gas, burn it a lot more clean with the generator, and then convert that gas into Bitcoin, which generates money for the oil producer. Those sites frequently will go up and down in size based on the generators they have at the site or the amount of flow of gas. And by having these modular units that you can take pieces off and go move part of your data center somewhere else, that wasn't something that was available to the market. I mean, there was other solutions that were similar, but not in the same way that our units all bolt together into one assembly. And that's really allowed a lot of our clients to change the business model that they had and make it more financially feasible to do these sites and not have to worry about committing to a really large build and then being stuck with that build at one site, and giving them the flexibility to move bits and pieces of their data center to other sites as required.
Hmm. Wow, that's a huge shift and change. Let's look ahead for the new year for 2024. So with the Bitcoin halving on the horizon, how is Digital Shovel prepared for that event?
We're excited. Like I said earlier, it is traditionally um, led by a rally, which we're already starting to see. Frankly, I did not think we were going to see it quite as quickly as we have. I thought we were still going to be in the 30s going into the next year, and then start to rally up from there. Um, Again, I mentioned earlier the ETF pushing that a lot more aggressively. And we've just been building and tooling up, getting inventory in place, getting ready for the next bull run. So we're excited and we're prepared to help our customers reap the benefits of it.
Great. And how do you foresee the halving on the mining sector as a whole?
I think the price of Bitcoin increasing plus the increase in transaction fees, whether it be from ordinals or just larger market participants coming into the space, will offset that halving. I mean, the designing of the halving was basically for that. The assumption was transaction fees would continue to go up, and the price of Bitcoin would go up, and the halving would come down every 4 years roughly to offset that until such time that we no longer needed the block reward. The block reward was merely meant to be there as a subsidy to help sustain the network and provide incentive for people to be part of the network, and continue securing the network and acting as a node in mining. Once we get to a point where the transaction fees are so high in terms of volume, not on a per transaction base, other things like Lightning and ordinals are helping to support the network and build adoption, as well as as well as the price going up. We won't need the block reward in order to help offset that.
So, what major trends do you anticipating happening for the mining industry in 2024 other than the halving?
Um, we're seeing more people moving. There's still the majority is still air cooled data centers. There is more and more adoption of hydro, which is where you're cooling the miner directly with water on a cold plate. Immersion cooling as well, which we have a solution coming out for very shortly. The reuse of heat through both of those mechanisms. You can reuse the heat for air cooling, which we have a solution for already. However, when you convert the heat into liquid, it's a lot easier to transport that heat and move it around to heat a building or preheat hot water tank or a pool or something to that effect. We're seeing more and more of that and more options coming to market for things like that. So it's exciting to see what things we can do to further better the environment by reusing that heat while at the same time mining Bitcoin and securing the network and making money.
Hmm. Yeah. I know you do a lot in product development and working directly with your customers, hearing a lot of their perspective, which allows you to build an even better product. Was there anything that you plan on doing for your customers in the coming year? Any key features for them without giving away too much? I know that you have a lot of IPs.
One thing we're working on is what we refer to as a megapod. We got our mini pod, which is our current line. Megapod is actually going to be a modular building. So some of our clients want that large building structure or closer to a full-size building rather than a modified container type feel, which is something we're planning to probably premiere Q3-ish, Q2, end of Q2, start of Q3 of this year. We're going to have our immersion container, which will be coming out around the same time. And then we've got a couple other things on the hardware side coming out, but I'm not quite ready to release those yet.
Okay. I've got two more questions for you. As the CEO and founder of the company, what key lessons have you learned in this process that you're going to carry into the next year?
Never assume that Bitmain is going to keep things consistent. One of the major manufacturers of equipment, they have a tendency to try and they innovate, but they do change things, form factors. Most recently, they just changed their cabling setup and then also moved to a three-phase power setup. Getting a little technical there, but just it makes it a little more challenging for our clients to be able to know what type of equipment they need to build their data centers for. Um, and just never never assume we're going to stay up, always be ready for the biggest bear market and being able to ride that storm. Anybody can ride the wave when we're in a big bull market. Being prepared for the bear markets and making sure you're providing a solution that works for your customers, whether the market's up or down, is probably the biggest piece of insight I can give there.
And then lastly, what advice would you give to new entrants into the mining space?
Get in now. Do not get in when the numbers look crazy on your spreadsheet and everybody's going crazy trying to buy stuff. Prices are through the roof and lead times are super long. There's usually a good correction. A correction will come at some point. It might not be a full correction, but it'll at least give you some sort of an opportunity to get in with good timing. Again, very similar to buying Bitcoin. You've really got to time the market just as you would when you're buying the equipment.
Right. Great. Well, this was super insightful. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great
Thank
day, Tori.
you.